So in this brainstorming, what I'd like to give birth to is a meme recipe, a potential of creating maximum human well-being, referencing the definition of intelligence, the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being, and looking at some of the landscape that we have available. The landscape in the United States culture, including homelessness, including a dearth of low-cost housing, and including very narrow dimensional well-being in terms of quality of life. I would reference the fact that I'm in a city that is considered one of the wealthiest in the United States, which is considered a wealthy country, and there's no altar of gratitude. There's no trauma recovery center that I can access 24/7. There's no celebration center on a daily basis where I can go to celebrate things. There's no place to share community art in a fluid and dynamic way. There's also a dearth of embodiment protocols where if I listen to a great book, I've just been listening to several, where I can take those ideas and immediately act on them in a spontaneous and constructive way. So I'm going to map out a possible paradigm, a possible meme for responding to this and other situations. And the first thing that I want to do is define a space. The feminine essence begins with creating space. And on the spatial dimension, what I would say is that there needs to be seed funding for this particular meme in the 400K plus range. There also needs to be a space with freedom, meaning so much of our spaces are bound by so many laws and designations that literally it's impossible to create an off-grid solar home with a composting toilet or any number of other things. And so one of the criterias is a zone in which legal freedom is created for construction and living in a way that doesn't violate, our basic rights of, there's a commitment within the space, not to cause physical harm, steal, the various tenets that create cohesive community, but that in the living environment, there is not a barrier to intelligent construction, to intelligent living. Intelligence being the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. So a zone of free government, because one of the paradigms is an awareness that we need models of intelligent living, of 10x living, models that translate into 10 times more well-being per unit of energy invested. So the paradigm, if we have a larger field out here for the paradigm, we're looking at 10x living and intelligent design. And within the space itself, and so each of this has a series of roles, the roles of creating seed funding. Now this can be done in a no-interest loan, or it can be done in forms of a grant. And in terms of the the legal structure around this. You have nonprofit. You have agreements. And you have roles. We have, this creates the role of a person to gather seed funding and secure that. The role of someone to create a landmass of, let's say, 7 to 200 acres. So you have 7 to 200 acres, and you have, within the legal framework, a lease to. You have a variety of securing the space type protocols. One is a lease to own. Another is a right to use and enhance. So within the legal framework, if you are a landowner, you can grant a free lease to the project of several years, and you can, with the right to enhance within parameters, that would basically allow all forms of 10x living, and the opportunity to invest further. So the goal, one of the goals, this is another adjunct to this, one of the goals is to leave a 10x low-cost housing community in the wake of a festival, in the wake of a celebration. So we have, within the paradigms or intentions around this, celebration, growth, contribution. And within this framework, a purchase agreement, a lease agreement, purchase agreement with a note, a down payment and a series of payments. That's partly where the 400K comes in. Within a lease agreement, where it could be that the land is secured, and for the first year there is a $5,000 payment of earnest money, and after that point there is a monthly lease payment in a long-term lease framework of, say, 20 or 30 years. So something if it's a lease in excess of 20 years, and a legal mechanism from which the lease could transform into ownership. And so this is securing the space. And there's a series of roles, an attorney or more. And there needs to be an architecture around this that can allow for fluid participation, where everything is done fluidly online, so one person can begin where the other person leaves off fluidly and consciously. A paradigm of transparency, where everything that is done is organized via a set of values. This ties in with and one of the values is transparency. And one of the values is well-being, intelligence. And in this framework, every decision can be referenced to those values to make it consciousness. In the paradigm in which the more conscious a process is, the more well-being is generated through consciousness. So we have a couple of structures around this, and this is securing the space. Now, the core of the space is a learning and well-being event. That's the nucleus around this. So within this land, there is an intention to have an event lasting approximately 6 weeks, with some work that can be done ahead of time, with some work that may be done after time. But the idea is to create a 10x event. And to this, I would reference Burning Man as a starting point, where, again, land is secured for a very short amount of time, a couple of weeks, and an event, a festival, descends. People bring and collaborate to bring work for that event from from around the world, and it is created and then it is demolished. But this is a different type of event where something is created with the intention of it being a 10x living environment for approximately 150 people. And so within this framework, the contributions are developed in a way that optimize the opportunity for a 10x living environment. And so within this aspect, we have electricity, sleeping quarters, common space, and we have water, and we have septic, we have food, and we have internet, and we have app infrastructure. The app infrastructure is one of the technologies that is we can pioneer to move in the direction of a more conscious and fluid and spontaneous, not only event, more participatory event, but a sustainable living environment long term. And these things have to be in place for a festival, which can support approximately 1,000 people. So learning well-being event for 1,000 people or so on the ground. And it can balloon up higher than that for day visits and short-term visits. But, approximately 1,000 people that will spend a week or longer at any given point throughout the event. So within the event paradigm, if we take this out, I think 24/7 filming of public places. So the conference rooms, meeting rooms, ritual rooms, 24/7 media generation. And this is about bringing this energy field and these gifts into larger circulation. And the format for this is a combination of core filming set up within the structures that just are designed to record in quality video and audio what goes on in the spaces 24/7, or at least any time that something is happening within that space. It could be motion and heat activated. So you have the 24/7 filming of public space. And this is part of the service module, or the service intention of bringing this out into many more hundreds of thousands of people benefiting from this event, and also a media generation protocol where anyone involved with the event has access to that 24/7 material as part of attending the event, number one. Number two, where all of the media is put online in the cloud for editing and dissemination as participants see fit within a Creative Commons. This is kind of referencing the TED protocol, in which media is shared in Creative Commons to be used for purposes of well-being. And when you have thousands of hours created by this different camera, it creates a landscape and a resource with which to curate narratives for years to come, because the unedited footage is in the cloud. WeVideo, for example, offers a cloud editing system where this technology is put in the cloud. All the raw footage is there grouped by time and location and subject matter in that material, which creates a role then of someone to organize and title the data for a given space. So there's a communal participation. But there's also the option of adding media, where so many of us, myself included, have extra cameras and SD cards, etc., to add supplemental data, where anyone can film it as part of an agreement to upload unedited the footage into the cloud. The private spaces of individual sleeping quarters, etc., not being part of this, but the public spaces being a part of it. Now, this it ties in with the financial module, etc., because it creates a revenue source with YouTube. It also creates a rich media context for every presenter, artist, participant, etc., to create out of this their own media, which means that you may have hundreds of versions of the festival and the creation process told by hundreds of people in their own language, in their own style. So this generates an abundance of media going forward. Now, so you have the 24/7 filming. Within the financial dimension, you have money involved in participating. You have money for the land and for the raw materials. And you also have money for food. And because the purpose is one of modeling and embodying 10x living, the process of generating community is the education, is the core aspect. And so within the time schedule of all of this, which is kind of is one of the dimensions, each day is spent with 4 hours of community building. It's spent in 4 hours of learning. It's spent in 4 hours of celebration. And 4 hours of personal time. And the 8 hours of sleeping. And this is part of a 10x living protocol. And so as part of the 4 hours a day spent building, we have food, cleaning, art, and building. Now, there are two waves of this. There's the initial setup of the community space, and this is within a paradigm of, for someone like myself, the honor of participating and helping to build and donate time and perhaps donating money to set up such a space is very satisfying. And so it's, that's more of the architect role, the initiatory and the architect and the space role. And so that's the core team. In Burning Man, that's the setup team. And the things that need to be set up are a lot of temporary, sleeping. And most of this is, brought, as with Burning Man, by the participants. The supplies to camp, to sleep, etc. The toilet system is set up as a compost generation plant for enhancing the soils of the community. And so there's the quote, human waste or human nutrients of the event becomes the initial source of fertilizer for developing the garden areas of the land. And so you have aspects of, the permaculture or biodynamic principle in which the goal is to make an area of land 70% self-sufficient, where at least 70% of what occurs on the land is generated by the land itself. And in that sense, beginning with an infusion of people over and above the amount generates, in sustainable composting protocols, an enormous amount of rich soil, rapidly generated, mixed with native soil in a topsoil generating protocol, as opposed to bringing in hundreds of porta potties that then get hauled off and smell bad and all of that. This is actually a design for a temporary composting unit where the water generated and treated with biodegradable soaps is actually part of a treatment process that becomes part of the village. And so, an area of land is designated for the temporary sleeping, as the more permanent areas for, we've got 1,000 people or so for 150 units of low-cost tiny houses. And the paradigm that of most of the 10X designs that I've found to be most efficient is one where you have approximately 100 square feet to 150 square feet of sleeping area that is warmed almost instantly by the presence of human beings, thus eliminating a great deal of the need for heat, that is connected with a solar array. So you have the solar system. Now the solar system provides shade, provides cover for the meeting spaces, becomes communal spaces, and generates the electricity needed for the community. Some of the waste transformation plants become, permanent bathrooms and shower generation, where you have a communal bathing system where there's hot water generated through solar and through earth there's some great technologies that begin with 500-foot boring, or lots, 8 feet down or so, an infrastructure of piping which generates heat. And so the process is one of both education, but not just mental, where you've actually gone away participating in the leading technologies for efficiently and cost-effectively transforming the energy needed to live well and sustainably, is built together. And so, there's an element of this initial architecture that consists of purchasing a mini excavator, and probably one is enough. It might be a purchase of one that's left on site, to facilitate community development afterwards, or it can also be a leased 2 or 3 and purchase of one mini excavator, because there's a lot of shaping and space creation in the process of creating a place like this. Now, the living units can be a combination of the 20-foot shipping containers that, as they're brought on site and put into position, for example, in hillsides, one of the goals would be to bury most of the shipping containers with skylights in a protocol where you're preserving a lot of the natural landscape visually, but creating very warm, insulated, 30 to 100-year-long dwellings built into the hillside. In more flat areas, a variety of protocols can be created, either tucking them in existing vegetation and having individual solar panels on the roof, or you can even take an area of flat land and through changes of the grade, partial burying and generating soil on top, creating a living roof that spans the entirety of 100 or so shipping containers that can also be tied in with wind protection, and the entire roof gets covered after pouring a slab. The other option that's very valuable is, there's cob technology. And I think one of the goals would be to showcase 3 different styles of living, from using recycled wood to create a fully insulated, independent sleeping area, to various forms working with shipping containers that bring the material on site needed for the festival, so that the shipping containers can be purchased for an average of $3,000 a piece in the 20-unit range. The design can be developed in advance through the architectural module of rolls. It's an area that I'm personally quite interested in. And all of the supplies for the entire event and future community are packed into the shipping containers. They're again creating a roll where, as part of the core team, 150 different people are each responsible for organizing and packing one container each, as the various needs for the event are prepared, packed in the shipping container, trucked into position, unpacked in order to facilitate the event. The initial main tents that are needed, because there's a temporary infrastructure within the structure of the event that's then needed to, from there, build the more permanent structure at a protocol of 4 hours a day of building. And people get to choose which type of building module they're most interested in. And part of the training is to learn to build that area of community with excellence, whether it's transforming a shipping container, building tiny houses out of waste and recycled wood. That's part of the protocol. And developing the community spaces for shared resources, a community garden. And again, as part of that 4 hours a day, to plant and cultivate a garden, where in part of the 4 hour time, there's the transformation of human waste into a fully healthy set of not only fertilized water, potable water, because the reverse osmosis system, municipalities have reached the level where it's very easy to transform shower water, rainwater, and the liquid form of waste all back into completely potable water that is safer than what's currently coming out of our taps because it's unchlorinated and not treated with, I forget the chemical that's supposedly to help our teeth, fluoride. And so there's the process of transforming water into this module of water for both the festival. Again, initial water may be trucked in shipping containers. Where how do you transform a shipping container into a potable water tank that is then used for the festival, and at the end of the festival, when that amount of water is no longer needed, either becomes in-ground storage of water, if it's a drought tolerant, if it's a low rainwater area. Some of the water or some of the money may be spent to drill a well, if that is a suitable source of water for that area of land. But otherwise, even in desert countries, thousands of years ago, the underground villages in deserts had roofs that were designed to collect and create cisterns for the entire year, thus making the land completely self-sustaining, where the high floodwaters are all gathered, put underground, and then from there drawn on. And they didn't have the benefit of reverse osmosis, which would be an important part of this. The internet could be, in order to allow us to go into wasteland areas where there's little current habitation, the infrastructure would either be satellite, with that in mind, or if there are cell towers, etc., set up in a fusion so that there are maybe 100 or so accounts to allow rapid dissemination of data over a 3 or 4G network, or if there's cable or internet, then even better. So that's up in the air, but an awareness that we can have 100 megabytes per second satellite internet that will be the tool that brings the festival of a 6-month or of a 6-week long journey that people can watch all around the world as this is developed, learning what can be done to create a meme. How can 1,000 people learn, grow, have a 10x experience, and create a sustainable village in 6 weeks, such that the 150 people that would like to develop and live in this arena long term are set up to A, host another festival at some point in the future, but B, have a completely independent 10x living situation that is costing individuals $40,000 or less to fully embody in the area, because like where I live, you can't get a house for less than $600,000, and it doesn't have any of these features or amenities or community lifestyle. So there's a module designed for the village that is developed in advance. So it begins with securing the land. Next comes the development cost, and this is where the $400,000 comes in up front, because people need to see something, in order to believe it and participate. And so, but when you consider a 10x community being created by $400,000 of initial monies, there is a very large percentage of people, particularly some of the festival attendees, that may want to secure a permanent role in the community they've helped to build, in the same protocol, where it's part of an educational protocol where for the first year minimal, the entire public spaces of that community are going up into the cloud, and then with the permission of residents being edited to share the design and build process of a sustainable 10x community. So this is the result. The idea that after loving and celebrating and learning and participating together, that there is a fruit, that there is a seed planted in the media, and that there is a seed planted for somewhere between 75 and 150 people to immediately occupy and further develop the space to pioneer new technologies, to document those technologies, and to create a microculture where each of these is unique. And that becomes part of a network of microcultures where what does and does not work is documented. The friction points and the flow points, logistically, emotionally, mentally, and financially, are documented for others to learn from, for others to grow from. And this can become a revenue source for the community, where one or several of the roles, because obviously the economic dimension is an important one for the 30% of energy that will be imported, whether that's outside internet or food supplies that is not grown on land. Now, the community garden is part of a design that would be intended to create organic, sustainable food for the entire community in all the vegetables, supply of fruit, so that imported foods are a luxury that can be enjoyed but is not essential. A very important part is a goal of a 90% waste elimination, and that's part of making sure that 70% of what's generated is on the land and for the land. The three types of structures that I encourage, or am thinking of, maybe four, is temporary, semi-temporary permanent structures such as yurts, teepees, etc. That's one demographic. The other is shipping containers, buried or otherwise. The other is shotcrete poured concrete, where an excavation is made in the land. If there's a slope, or that may be generated with the with the machinery. And I would reference you to 10xliving.org, where on the dimensional aspect of the design, I've broken this down in a lot more detail as one map from which to experiment and deviate. The scientific paradigm that if you're unsure of something, give it a try on a small scale. And this is, of course, an entire experiment in and of itself, the goal being how to improve on typical Western living by tenfold. And it's not dogmatic. It is measured by the well-being generated daily by the people living there. And that is the compass. And so that's part of the protocol, where every person registers emotionally, mentally, physically, financially, and logistically, how is their well-being on this place, with a comparison group created in a nearby vicinity where 100 or so volunteers would agree to update their well-being, so that there's a comparison study, a scientific outcome of how much of this design, which certainly will reduce energy consumption by 90%, will reduce the ecological footprint. Because part of this concept of 100 square foot sleeping areas is lots of community space for community cooking, community eating, community bathing, community gardening, community games, community meditation, community prayer. Each of these needs spaces, community burial, so that you have, a protocol of moving through life in this community, with one's body eventually fertilizing the soil in a sacred space, in a garden honoring life's purpose and honoring the dead by letting their body come back into a natural soil from which a beautiful garden, a visual garden, honors them, so that the place of greatest beauty is blessed with the fertilizer of those who have died on the community and been honored in a good death. A birthing unit for water births, and a careful cultivation of skills within community residence, where people who want to join learn a skill that can be useful in this living style to contribute to the other community members, but also contribute again to the larger media environment of how a 10x lifestyle can look like. So that's this dimension of leaving, that after 6 weeks of 1,000 people, each contributing 4 hours a day towards the building process, that a fruit is left. Typically after a festival is gone, there are millions of paper plates, there's millions of plastic spoons, there's whole trucks. Stuff is, you spend as much energy tearing stuff down and hauling it back, and it's incredibly unsustainable, and there's nothing to leave for it. And you have an environmental festival where people fly in and drive in, and they generate more carbon footprint because the festival existed than if it didn't. So how is it celebrating the environment? And so this aims to respond to that there's actually, that every individual on this place is carbon negative by planting 300 trees apiece. And for that, it certainly helps. They can either fund that with trees off-site, or if the area is big enough, plant those trees. So that, and that ties in with the idea of green roofs as opposed to, dotting the landscape with 150 tiny houses. With the shotcrete technique, you've got the framework of, doing a rebar mesh in detail, cladding that with fencing, and a core team developing the shotcrete technology to turn that into organic, more curved shapes, houses built into the ground that can then be covered with a waterproof membrane, provided drainage underneath, using the infrastructure of the buried pipes to have in-floor radiant heat if needed, depending on the climate. And suddenly you've got these beautiful hobbit-like structures in the ground, all shotcreted with concrete in a way that's very organic, where everyone is unique. So everyone gets to create their own frame and participate in that, and where the volunteers get to participate with long-term residents in a feedback loop. So you helped shotcrete this individual place right here and built this nice dome, and then you get to have a dialogue with the person who ends up living there. Do they like the shape? How is it? What could you do better? And so you've got a tremendous amount of learning here. With the context of media, one of the things that, that these ultimate community spaces that can, have shared ping pong tables, shared art studios, shared gardening studios, shared media creation, that these community spaces that need to be developed become in the short term, the conference spaces, where one of the things that can bring a lot of life and a tremendous potency of learning is by having two different events during the conference that at any given moment, so people can pick based on their preference, where you have two different events where a core panel of 3 or more presenters. So let's say you had 7 presenters. 3 of them might be there in person for the full 6 weeks. And 3 of them might be teleconferenced in from around the world for that specific 3-hour presentation. And the level of sophistication and participation to make it more organic, one of the ways I think is valuable, rather than fighting the constant distraction of the cell phone, etc., is to use app technology where, as a presentation is unfolding, participants can post ideas and questions, and they can be upvoted to be discussed by the panel. And also the audience can vote on which panelist to go into more depth about a given topic based on the feeling, the energy in the room, as opposed to trying to say this presenter has to talk 30 minutes, then this presenter 30 minutes, but actually have a flow. Breaking the debate format with a specialized, like if you have Rupert Sheldrake participating, for example, in a given panel, if there's a historical scientific precedent question that comes up, that may go to him because that's his area of expertise. If there's a permaculture question that comes up, that would go to the panelist there. That you're actually exploring human well-being and personal and community level in these 4 hours a day of education in 2 separate events where you get to share, and where, because all that media is going upline, if you didn't catch that because you were there and you have your 4 hours of personal space every day, you can do the full 8 hours of both events. And so, just by downloading the material that was just uploaded, or going into the space to rewatch what was just filmed. And so in this format, not only does a YouTube environment show an incredible amount of value, where you can actually go in, watch initial summaries free on YouTube, and then participate in the whole event for a fee that helps to pay for this, because one of the goals would be to have 400,000 or so in seed funding, and by the end of 6 weeks to have fully paid for that back and generated additional revenue, so that presenters can be given forms of well-being in the area they want it. So some presenters may just want to volunteer their presentation. Some presenters may, as part of signing up and being transparent about what they need for well-being in their own lives, maybe what one presenter really needs is an intern to come and spend a month with them, helping them become computer literate. Not all presenters are computer literate. That may be holding one presenter back. And so the goal is to, and then there may be an intern who would, after spending time with that presenter in the conference, has the time and would love to go and spend a month helping with that, and they have the skills to do so. And so in that format, there's a flow of energy back and forth. Anyone would be set up, any presenter would be shipped a media setup so they can be in their own house and participate with crystalline audio, good internet signal, and participate in the events. That opens it up into a truly world-level events of presenters, because a lot of these presenters would love to be in a 3-hour conversation with each other that serves the audience at the same time. And that simultaneously builds media presence, that simultaneously becomes footage that can be part of their individual documentaries, edited out of those. The cloud-based storage concept of like a WeVideo, where all the video is up and each presenter is given access to edit that. This also creates a role for longer-term community members to digest and create maybe 20 documentaries out of this 6-week period, and cater some of those to the presenters. Maybe that's what the presenters want more than anything, is a personalized documentary to come out of this. And that then is a media or a financial reservoir to learn out, because if we can create a tutorial infrastructure where people can learn how to use our equipment and our maps and our video and create a unique documentary, so that 20 to 50 people come out of this process of 1,000 people showing up actually knowing how to create media that they didn't know how to create before. That is a valuable skill. There's a financial element in designing a community as well. Virtual assistants, if they're trained well and get tutorial guidance, can create easily $30 an hour and work worldwide on a high-speed internet connection. Thus, this landmass can be hundreds of miles from the nearest town, with possibly even an electric personalized flying device for medical emergencies to bring someone to a hospital 100 miles away, thus reducing the cost of land, making this non-competing with existing locales that might be threatened by something that's so different. The fact that it's being kept at 150 people or less, is much less intimidating than a new city of thousands of people in a completely new culture. So this is, I think, a very important thing, and it ties the 150 is referencing anthropologists who find that traditional tribes were rarely bigger than 150 in living groups, because you lose track of one another. After, you can't remember the birthdays, the names of more than about 150 people. You can't really get to know more than 150 people. And so much of our culture's dis-ease comes from the fact that we don't understand each other enough to intersect with each other respectfully, with sight. So that's a really important part of this. And so, the framework for the actual conference events is, within every day, there's 8 hours of presentations from some people at the conference and from teleconferencing on large screens where there might be 300 or 400 people in each room, with very large projected screens that facilitate that and allow the audience to submit questions, allow those questions to be upvoted so that it's really it's really responsive to an audience. It might even be broken into 3 different panels so that the groups could be even more intimate, of maybe 150 or so people, interacting with 4 great presenters in long form, good 3-hour presentations with a few breaks in between. And so, the protocol of the festival, is after you arrive and set up your sleeping situation, is, first of all, it begins in advance. You as you're coming, you list your skills 1 to 10. I'm a baker, 5 out of 10. I'm a gardener, 6 out of 10. I'm really good on composting. I'm a framer. I know how to do people's nails. I know how to do this. So you list your skills coming in, and your resources, and based on that, a sharing economy can take place during the event, where people get their nails done, people get their hair done, bakers bake beautiful, things for the community. And so you have 4 hours a day going to build the community. You have 4 hours a day set aside for learning for each individual. You have 4 hours set a day for personal. And then you have 4 hours to celebrate together as a community, to participate in meditations, in yoga, in dancing, in chanting, in artwork together, so that it's an incredibly rich day. Now, the funding for such an event is already proven in the Burning Man method, where everything is provided, and people just contribute $200 or $300 each for arriving on the space. All of that money, let's say each person just showing up contributed $400 or $500 for a 6-week event rather than a 10-day event. That 500 times 1,000, there's your 500,000 right there. One of the main reasons seed funding is needed is just the cash flow to set that up initially. But if you have 1,000 people, each contributing $500 and bringing their sleeping stuff and bringing food supplies, which can be broken up, basically how it would be done was that a menu would be created participatorily, and the cost of the menu broken down, and people would bring that amount of food or could pay money for the organizers to bring that particular ingredient. Very similar to Burning Man, so that the core facilities are provided for. That's generating the 500,000 right there. But in addition, some people may want to volunteer, to contribute additional amounts. And the people who will end up living here will need to contribute an amount that makes it sustainable. It could be an amount of work and service and skill. It could mean bringing in financing from the outside. It could mean having the ability to generate income within the community's economy. Long term, it's generally a good idea in a situation like this that each person in one way or another can contribute at least $1,700 a month, and perhaps more. And there can also be a partnering of services. Someone might have a set of parents that, rather than go to an old folks' home, would love to be part of a 10X community and that need care and attention. And other people in the community may be able to provide that, providing a 5 to 10 times nicer experience for a dying couple, or someone with terminal cancer, with care within the community at less money than it costs to send someone to a hospital or a community caring facility, but also generating the money, because this is a much more sustainable system of design, because you're not creating separate kitchens, separate bathrooms, separate ping pong tables, separate theaters for every person. You're doing that in community space. And you've got the garden to grow food. So in this dynamic, there's as part of the core architectural team, part of the process is learning how to bring strangers together in a way that brings out their best gifts, that gives them the experience of playing a role they're competent to play, that brings their greatest talent to the community while exposing them to everyone else's talent. So it's creating a synergy and an abundance of wealth. And so there's no reason why, well, there's many reasons why it couldn't, but there's a real possibility using this model and this technology that everyone who comes has far more well-being, than they could have obtained in any other 6 weeks of their time, and with any other, use of the 500, 1,000 or so that they spend in doing that, and that the people who remain, become part of the process of fusing, that they get to know each other in this event, that they get a feel for whether it's for them or not, because this is the model of community life. 4 hours a day towards investing in the community, 4 hours a day of work generating, income and well-being, and for that 30% that needs to come in, 4 hours a day of personal space, 4 hours a day to build the relationships and tend the community, and sleep. And you've got the media set up from all of this to have an incredibly interactive dynamic with the rest of the world that's very interested. Whether it's Bhutan wanting, in their ministry, wanting to learn about what creates happiness, whether it's, different people that are trying to create community on their own, doing this in a documented way that's designed to create a recipe that says, this is how we did this. You get to watch it visually, you get to see it in metrics, you get to see the data. And if you want to do this, this is the data that we've created. It's important, and I would reference the 10xliving.org, to have a complete infrastructure of induction, of collaboration, of self-governing, of a community's constitution, etc., and a way to leave. A way of, where any person who it's not a good fit for can migrate out of the community, but that the community's core is retained. Anyone who wants to come into that type of community can take their place, and they can extract, if they've invested 30,000 or so in the ownership as a right to live there, that they're able to sell that right within the framework that supports the community and affords them the freedom to go. This space here of the temporary sleeping provides also a possibility of visitor income and visitor industry, where, again, students and interns permanently may wish to come and participate in the development and in the monitoring and in the documenting of the community in exchange for either a stipend or for room and board. When you've got decent setup tents with the tents can be set up on cob or concrete pads that have radiant heat, so that the tents are warm. You've got a stable floor to put them in. You've got internet and electrical outlet, so that you can literally arrive with a tent and participate in this community for a week, etc., following a protocol developed by the community. So this is the vision, that one of these conferences would occur every year, and that these tears of joy, these residues of that energy field, are left as microclimates, where as it goes forward each year, it develops, it grows. Some of the participants in the community might want to come and attend a 6 weeks conference and then return to the community and bring the gifts of that for next year's community. Some people might want to participate in each community. Some people who get to know people here may want to come back from time to time as temporary guests, within a camping framework. And an app infrastructure that allows every participant to participate and see what's going on, thus pioneering a new form of self-governing, of community governing, of maintaining a synergy field of peak well-being that is co-created by everyone who is a part of this, and where the data is ultimately accountable to well-being. How is each person doing mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, and logistically in all the areas of their life, in this aspect of the community, in their employment. How can the community facilitate a training process that, someone out of college or high school could come in a tent, go through a training program, and be considered a potential candidate to be induced for a 1-year residency that could become permanent if it was generating well-being for all concerned. And if it's not, what can we learn from that? So this is the paradigm for releasing energy that results in a new version of 10x living every single year that generates more value for all concerned than the costs by a large margin, and that contributes to the species, that contributes data that may in time be useful as we become interplanetary. Because if you can tell exactly how to do this on a barren piece of land with minimal energy, with minimal costs, etc., that's the kind of technology you want on the first ship to Mars or the first moon base, or reclaiming a desert, or repopulating a burnt-out city, or helping a city break itself into modules of this nature that restore well-being, in high crime areas and areas where cities are dying. But that this technology is pioneered in oases and then shared with the larger species. I'm Dane Rose, and thank you for your attention.